Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blues Talk. We're again John, Dave, and myself. We're going to look forward to the opening rounds of this season's Pro 14. Look back on the Champions Cup semi-finals last weekend, and have a good old chinwag about South Africa joining the Pro 14 and all the other rugby news. So, lads, we take on Dragons this weekend. Our first match against Pro 14 opposition of this season. So, looking forward to getting back.
Yeah, it'll be good to have the Pro, whatever you're having yourself back again. As it stands, it's the Pro 12. It might finish the season as the Pro 16. So, God only knows. And then, of course, there's the courts, but we'll come to that. The visit of the Dragons. Dragons aren't quite the pushover that they once were. They've been tooled up a fair bit by the WRU. They've got guys like Jamie Roberts, who is not, it must be said, the most dedicated of performers in the Pro 14. They've Ross Moriarty, who's always good for a red card. But they're a better team than they were. They're coached by Dean Ryan, who's a much more competent coach than they've had. And he's got a plan. So I would fully expect Leinster to win. Apparently, Leinster have a full deck to choose from, apart from the known injuries. There's no withdrawals for squads or things like that, which is unusual for a game against the Dragons. So it'll be interesting to see what team we pick.
Yeah. Just going back to what you were saying, Dave, about Dragons there. Like, obviously Dean Ryan's come in last season, and they qualified this year again for the Heineken Cup. Last season, that's their first time in 10 years that they're going to be in the Heineken Cup. And they got to the quarterfinal of the Amlin a couple of weeks ago. So, they're kind of a team that's improving in Wales. I'm not sure if they're the best of a bad lot of the Welsh clubs, or if they genuinely are improving under Dean Ryan.
Well, they're not even the best of a bad lot, because the Scarlets are way better. The Ospreys won't
second best, John.
The Ospreys won't be shit for long, I don't think. I've always been a kind of a casual admirer of Dean Ryan. I mean, he's you could say he's been found out a few times in his coaching, and he did lose a big coaching job a few years ago there that was high profile. He coached Gloucester for a long time, and I can't remember, was it them?
Worcester.
It was Worcester.
He was in Worcester.
But I think he kind of lost the gig at Gloucester and ended up in the wilderness for a while, and turned up at Worcester a while later.
He was on Sky Sports doing punditry on the rugby show, and he was pretty good at that.
I always liked him as a pundit, I have to say.
There was a suspicion, and indeed an accusation, that his teams were very physical, occasionally overly so, but that he couldn't coach a team to do much more than that. Not necessarily sure that that's true, because that Gloucester team was actually quite good. But that's always been the accusation that's been made about him. How much truth there is in that? There's probably a grain of truth in it. His teams are exceptionally physical; they always have been. But as numerous journalists have reminded us over the last week to 10 days, you can't win anything without physicality. So he's not necessarily wrong. It's the question whether he can take it to the next level. I mean, he has what's-his-face as well. Came back from Saracens, Hopkins, or whatever his name is.
Tompkins.
He came back from Saracens. So, I mean, and Dragons have always produced decent young players who then get poached by the other regions. So it'll be interesting to see what they present.
Yeah, Ross Moriarty, I liked your comment. He's always good for a red card. Ross, I wouldn't say it to his face, Moriarty, I believe his nickname is, and his uncle and his dad were two mad bastards as well.
Paul and Richie, if memory serves.
Yeah, a family that would burst you. I wouldn't like to upset them. He's the big slag in the Dragons have got in Wales anyway has been that they've, squandered their money on a few big signings, like your woman from Coronation Street at hooker, and
Pat Butcher.
Well, yeah, it was the other one I was thinking of with the leopard skin coat, but
Lynch.
Lynch, that's it. So him and Moriarty and one or two others have been seen as, money that if they'd have got three decent players for the price of that rather than one really, really good player who they're going to lose to Wales. But, the corollary of that is that, Wales are paying for it. So, what you going to do? You take what's good for Wales when you're owned by Wales, like we take what's good for Ireland when we're owned by Ireland. So I do believe Wales the WRU are trying to get back out of the Dragons again, or trying to find a buyer for the Dragons unsuccessfully. But
has a buyer not been found? It's taken a long time to work out the deal, especially as it regards Rodney Parade.
Well, other people are saying that there's a de facto takeover of the regions going by the WRU under the guise of lending them money under COVID. But, that could also just be a conspiracy theory. Who knows? Who knows the secrets of the WRU?
But they have the WRU did take out a loan. I think it's 20.4 million or something, 20 million sterling. And I think the reason that they had to do it was because the regions themselves couldn't get financing of that level because, of the fact that they're not really profit making.
Couldn't pay it back.
Well, yeah, well, that's it, yeah. So the WRU was able to went on the hook, if you like, for them, but apparently the repayment terms are, quite stringent. There won't be any 100,000 a year like certain other clubs get from their union.
Well, we'll see what Dragons pitch up against us. They normally have a crack at us. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they beat us twice in the one season, and not that many other teams beat us that season either. So, you never know what might. They seem to throw caution to the wind on arrival, and they might kind of blindside us now. I'm not saying they're going to win or anything, but might give us a.
They didn't put up much resistance last season. We beat them 50 points to 15.
That's true. I'll give you that one. But
in fairness, you have to say they weren't the only team that Leinster put 30 or 40 points on.
Yeah, exactly. But hopefully they'll do something. They'll do something exciting anyway on a Friday night. So welcome back rugby for the final season. It's a weird season, isn't it? The Premiership is still playing.
Yeah,
they're playing all 22 rounds of their season, starting at the beginning of August, and they're actually finishing out the whole thing. They're playing they're playing 2 matches this week. So for Exeter and Saracens, they've actually got 3 rugby matches in 1 week.
John, I can sum up how weird this whole season is on and off the pitch in one sentence.
Go on.
Jedward are now the intelligent and reasoned voice of Ireland.
I'll take your word for that.
It doesn't things don't get any stranger than that, do they?
Well, I don't know. I just wouldn't fancy being I was looking at their fixtures today. Exeter have played, as we know, at the weekend. They're playing again on Wednesday, and they're playing yet again on Sunday because all the teams are having their final round match at 3 o'clock on Sunday. So every single Premiership team is playing at 3 o'clock on Sunday, and Saracens and Exeter both playing on Wednesday and have a second round. So, I mean, obviously there's going to be massive rotation, and I think Exeter are playing London Irish on Wednesday, and if they win that, they can't be caught in the top spot. So it's a bizarre season. Whereas we've actually started the next season, and they're still going on. Plus, the Heineken Cup is going to be contested in the middle of next month. You've also got the Six Nations being finished off in October. Then you've got the November International, the 8 Nations November Internationals, which are part of next season, which is starting on Friday. And hey, look, I'm confused. Nobody knows what season it is. That's how confusing it is.
Well, we're late starting our season, our current season. This should normally.
Your season starts on Friday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for us.
Normally we'd be 3 rounds, maybe 4 rounds into it already. We'd be looking at the first European game.
Yeah.
It's just everything is. I mean, to a certain extent,
It's a bit like
season,
last
this
year
season,
with
are
the
kind
World
of
Cup,
things
Dave.
that are going to be permanently asterisks.
Yeah, but it's a bit like last year with the World Cup. You know what I mean? There was kind of
Yeah.
few matches when all the guys were away, and then there was sort of, them they'll filter back in once we're knocked out at the quarterfinal and so on. I was listening to Lancaster's press conference. He mentioned Tyke Furlong out again, another injury, calf injury this time. He seemed optimistic now. You can take that with as large or small a grain of salt as you want. But like Lancaster didn't seem to be overly concerned with that injury. And he also said Robbie Henshaw was A-OK after his HIA, which he picked up in the quarterfinal.
There was suggestions of a HIA for Johnny Sexton as well, or injury anyway for Johnny Sexton, but it hasn't been announced whether it's a fact or not. What do we think of the rest of Johnny Sexton's career, i.e., is it going to extend beyond this season?
Him, isn't it?
Well, is it up to him?
It'll extend, certainly for Ireland, it'll extend until there's somebody better than him.
Or he wants to retire.
The latter is more likely than the former, looking around. So unless this year catches up on him and his form starts to fall off a cliff, as things stand. Huh?
There's signs of that already,
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, he could be still halfway down the cliff, John, and he hasn't met any of the other contenders. That's just the way it is. There is no replacement in place. I mean, Ian Madigan's been brought home. It could be an option. Billy Burns, I don't think, is an option. I don't think Jack Carty's an option. And Joey Carberry is permanently injured. So, as things stand, it's him or Ross. And at the moment, you take him over Ross every day of the week.
For how much longer is that going to happen? I mean,
until Ross is better than him, John. At the end of the day, it's professional rugby.
Ross Byrne, come on, lads. Ross Byrne is not going to be the permanent solution for either Leinster or Ireland.
Not suggesting he is, but as things stand, he's currently the next cab on the rank, Jay.
Oh, he is. Yeah, I agree with you there. But until someone else comes along, John. Dave, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But Johnny Sexton is still the front man on the rank until somebody below him overtakes him in terms of performance, which hasn't happened. May happen this season, but it hasn't happened yet. I mean, my sense of it is that Ross Byrne will be kind of the holding guy in Leinster, and I think that his younger brother will overtake him.
Yeah. Well, we just don't know. It's all potential at this stage. We do know that Johnny is 107 and is bound to, if he doesn't feel it this season, he's definitely going to start feeling it after this season. I mean, what age is he? 35.
But John, just to counter that, right? Like, and I'm not picking an argument. I'm just like say he, in the course of over the lockdown, he trained his arse off. He got into fantastic shape, right? So he obviously pushed himself to get into that shape. Like listening to say, players that have retired now a few years, like when they're asked, why did you give up? It wasn't that they weren't getting a new contract, or it wasn't because their terms and conditions were so much significantly poorer than their previous year's contract. It was that their desire had gone. Like O'Driscoll said, his body was gone. Others say, I just couldn't do another pre-season. Whereas, Sexton, like,
let himself into
we saw the pictures. He put himself under, like, to get your body in that sort of shape takes a considerable effort. You know what I mean?
Well, in fairness, the type of bulking up and lifting, and that doesn't go. That doesn't go until you're 50s. What goes is the pace. Pace is the biggest one for a back.
But what I mean is, but John, it's not. I'm not saying about the pace. I'm talking about it's his desire to push himself to get into that shape. Whereas, say, when O'Driscoll, when it was one more year, in the back of his mind, he knew, I'm done. Like, he was sort of even saying, Ernest Seaway, saying, I was held together by Band-Aids in the last 6 months of that last year. and really only was doing it because I knew it was at the end and I didn't have to go through it again. Whereas Sexton's pushing himself. You know what I mean? Like, Sexton has nothing else to prove. He's done everything. He's won so much. Grand Slams, European Cups, Lions Tours, all that kind of, like, I don't know how many caps he's got for Ireland, 90 or whatever it is. Like, he's nothing else to prove. So he could easily walk away and say, I don't need it. Like all things in sports, when you come to the end, people just remember your last few games, unfortunately, and they very rarely remember the 50 brilliant games you played. It's always, like as we're having this discussion, is Johnny's career coming to an end? He's could be overtaken by X, Y, and Z player from the other provinces. But, he's got that desire to keep going. So you have to think that that's where his headspace is.
That's a fair point. I think that while the ravages of time will catch up with us all, determination that steely determination that he has can maybe stave them off for a bit longer than it can with others. Yeah. So.
I think in Ireland we can be quite, maybe perhaps overly age conscious. I mean, it's often been an accusation in Irish professional rugby that we're slow to pick young players. Perhaps we're a bit quick to move guys on. I mean, you look at what age Johnny Wilkinson played himself until 38, 39 when he retired.
Was it that late? Was it?
Yeah. Played a very long time and at the highest level. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, let's be brutal about it. We can throw Johnny on the scrap heap when there's a better model and rolls onto the factory floor, but at the moment there isn't, so he gets to keep the job.
Or we saw a guy like Donnacha Ryan playing at the weekend. Okay, I know there was different circumstances for his departure from the Irish scene, but like he was kind of discarded by Ireland. He wasn't given a central contract. His gig was up with Munster, and he moved, and he's got 3 or 4 years playing over in France. And again, up to him, like whether he wants to continue. But the way he played on last Saturday, you wouldn't guess that he's going to be 37 in December.
Maybe Simon Shaw Shaw is his mentor or his role model.
Yeah, exactly.
He played at the highest level until he was 40.
Yeah, mad stuff.
He went on the Lions tour when he was not far off 40.
Yeah, he was 39, I think, when he went in that last tour. Mm-hmm. And it was good value for it as well.
Yeah. Johnny Wilkinson retired from England when he was 32. Obviously, he played on with Toulon for quite a while afterwards. But 3 years afterwards, he was 35 when he retired.
He was there longer than 3 years, John. How long was he there when we were there?
He was there 4 years in total, I think. And he retired in 2014 at 35. Just gone 35, in fact. So, we're Johnny.
But his body was wrecked, though. Like, I remember seeing graphs of all the injuries he had, particularly in his 20s. Like, he hammered people in tackles.
Yeah, and he started very young as well. He played for England when he was a child. So being at the highest level, like Sexton was a few years older than when he got to the international capsville. I think he was mid-20s when he got his first international cap. In fact, it was Fiji in the RDS. Was his first cap. Yeah. The only time I can remember Ireland playing in the RDS, it was weird having a national anthem before a rugby match in the RDS.
Pleasure watching Ireland play while standing in my spot. Well, I remember that game because Sean O'Brien made his Irish debut that day after Dennis Leamy took a really bad knock. Actually, he got a real stinger, a compression job, and he had to go off. And everyone was clapping him. Whereas Miriam, of course, being from Tulla, was just super excited about Sean O'Brien coming on. So everybody else was there. Oh, poor Dennis, poor Dennis, poor Dennis. And whereas Miriam was like, "Hey, Sean."
Yeah, well, they both went on to have decent Ireland careers.
Certainly did. But boys, before we kind of get into, like, there's obviously a good bit to discuss about some things that happened in the rugby world over the last 7 days. But we'll just have a quick Sorry, go on.
I have a missive from Murdo.
Oh yeah, excellent.
Yeah, seeing as we're kind of still in the Pro 14.
No, I was going to do a preview of the matches, Dave.
Oh, are you? Okay, well, when we get to the preview of the Pro, whatever you're having yourself, we'll read out Murdo's missive.
Grand, okay. So, well, just going through the other matches on Friday is Zebre Cardiff. I see there's going to be 1,000 people at this. Well, sorry, there's going to be 1,000 tickets available for the Zebre match. I'm not sure whether 1,000 will be. Yeah.
All right.
I'd say
Zebre for that.
I'd say there'd be no problem getting 1,000 people to go to anything after a fucking lockdown.
Fair enough.
To go and
We
see.
could sell 1,000 tickets, Jay, for you and me throwing a ball around there on Tiernan Og.
True enough. But yeah, so like that's great to see some crowds getting back in rugby, and certainly clubs need it desperately. Ulster having an experiment as well this weekend. They take on Benetton, but they're allowing the 600 tickets, and there's going to be 850 people in Ravenhill or the Kingspan. I think they're doing a kind of a raffle on for 300 people who bought their membership this year, and like you can buy 2 tickets a pop. So it's good to see crowds getting back into games. There was 5,000 at the Toulouse match at the weekend, wasn't there?
All the French games, I think.
Was it 5,000 or was it not cut down to 1,000 on short notice?
Oh, maybe it was. Sorry, I thought it was 5,000.
I think I heard maybe that was just the Racing game because it was indoors. They had planned to have 5,000, and I know that, but I thought it was cut down to. I may be wrong, but memory serves.
No, I think there was 5,000 in Toulouse and 1,000 in Paris.
Yeah, maybe that was it. Yeah. Makes a difference.
Yeah, so I'm just going back to the Ulster game. Will Addison is out for a few months apparently. I think he's back surgery, so he's like continually been injured since he came. Yeah, you wouldn't put it past him having to hang up the boots, but he's had back surgery, so hopefully it'll work out okay for him.
Yeah, I was going to say he's Ulster, Darren Anderton.
Yes, exactly. Sick note. And there's another interesting injury up in Ulster as well. Tom O'Toole is out for several weeks with an ankle injury, and considering a Furlong is out, not like Tom O'Toole was included in the Ireland training squad. I'm not sure he would have made the match day 23, but he certainly, if that's 2 of your frontline 4,
I'd say he'd have been in with a shout. He's one of the guys who did come out with credit from Ulster's post-lockdown return. So I'd say he would have been knocking on Andy Farrell's door anyway. So he'll be a loss to both Ulster and Ireland.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Munster.
With Furlong out, you're going to John Ryan, or you're going to.
Yeah, with obviously you've got Porter there, but you'll be looking at John Ryan. You're looking maybe at Finlay Bealham. What side is he playing on these this week?
Tight head, I think.
Tight, isn't he?
Yeah, he was a guy that Joe Schmidt loved. I'm not sure about Andy Farrell. And then you're talking about John Ryan as well. There are candidates there, but they don't fill you with.
Well, Jason hates Finlay Bealham. Well, he doesn't hate him, but Jason doesn't rate Finlay Bealham.
Hates him with a passion.
Yes. Since he cheated in that game of poker, I can't forgive him.
He hates him more than he hates Nazis.
Exactly. Well, Munster have to travel over to Llanelli. Llanelli, there's a guy I used to love watching play for the Dragons, actually. Alan Brew is back in Wales.
Oh,
so he's back for Scarlets. I always thought he was a super player. He's probably getting a bit on now. He's probably in his
he must be
early to mid 30s now, I guess. But he had pace to burn, that lad did.
Big physical guy as well.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see.
Another
it's one of the most interesting ties of the round. Like, Munster away to the Scarlets. There's there are 2 heavy hitters in the league, if not in Europe. So
They both had similar enough records in the league last year. Both won 10, lost 5. Just I think Munster had that few extra bonus points that got them the playoff position over Scarlets.
In more things going badly for Ireland news, it appears that Shane Daly is a bit of a knock as well.
Yeah. Very light at fullback, aren't we?
Yeah, because he kind of played himself into contention for the Ireland squad, both by being good last season and by everyone else being crap.
Yeah, and particularly with Rob Kearney now heading off to the Western Force for his little pension boost.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a pension boost so much as an adventure, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Lifestyle choice, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like, the guy I would reckon, is relatively financially astute and could walk into something that's going to make him money fairly easily.
Maybe he's going to open a branch of the Bridge.
Yeah. I don't think he's doing it for necessarily the money. I'm sure it doesn't hurt. But I'd say he just wants to spend a year in Australia. I think Japan was the plan, but that didn't work out. So,
of course, are owned by your man Forrest, who has massively deep pockets.
Pots of dough.
Yeah.
But there's another guy, John, we were talking about, old Father Time catching up. Like, he obviously, like Rob Kearney didn't want to jack it in. Fergus McFadden, by all accounts, did. He just said, I've had enough of this. And, that's just, everyone is different and, different motivation, different things get you going. And, like, one lad said, both 34-year-olds, one said, let's give it a swing and go over to Australia and give it a swing for a year and see how it goes. And the other lad said, let's, pull up sticks and go.
Well, arguably, Rob Kearney is higher mileage because he started younger and had more exposure for both Leinster and Ireland than Fergus McFadden. McFadden was injured more, but arguably, Fergus McFadden would tackle you with his face around the shoelaces. So, that's why he was injured a lot, because I think you said last week, David, if chopping off your head and throwing it at a player would stop it, then he'd do it. So, he went hard, so you can't go hard and go forever, So, yeah, he's probably... don't forget as well, there's always a wife in your ear or a partner of some kind in your ear. I'm sure Johnny Sexton's wife is looking through her fingers every time he plays for Ireland, and I'm sure, all rugby players' wives are looking, especially when they get into their 30s. I'm sure Brian O'Driscoll's missus was looking through her fingers at him playing his last, because there's another guy that went hard and he did go for 15 seasons or more.
Yeah.
So there's a lot at stake for a guy at that age. You've got that far through your rugby career without, and you can still walk. Maybe.
I do wonder if Leinster might have kept on Rob for another year, though. It is a position we're a bit skinny, and certainly in terms of experience. I mean, if you look at it, our most experienced full-time fullback, is Jordan Larmour.
Yeah.
That's a lot of knowledge leaving the organisation at the same time,
Yeah. Isa and Rob gone in 2 seasons.
There's a serious changing of the guard, hasn't there been in the last few seasons? All there was a few stragglers were kind of hanging on from, even say the first Heineken Cup or that kind of squad. There was one or two, or maybe a few more than that, and slowly but surely, they're all gone now. O'Brien last season,
Jamie
and Carney gone now. Sorry, Jamie gone.
I mean, Rob and Jamie played in Cheika's first game as coach at Leinster in a pre-season friendly. So, I mean, he was the last man standing from that generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Him and Luke were the flavour of the month. Luke, I think, was the following season.
Yeah.
So the two of them were the new, young, exciting players on the scene at the time. And like you say, Rob Kearney started a year before Luke, and here he is still playing, and he's gone away to Australia to do it. he minds himself, though, in fairness, not just...
Well, he leaves the most decorated player in the history of Irish rugby, which isn't bad. Which,
No,
when you
it's not
consider
bad
that
legacy.
the last 15 years have been, pretty decorated,
Yeah.
to have been part of virtually all of it.
Yeah, it's good timing.
It wasn't
Rob.
like he played in the Jim Staples era, Imagine you've had 15 years playing in that team.
You might get one win.
Well, don't forget, Mike Gibson, for example, was the cap record holder up until very recently with something like 70. I think Mal O'Kelly broke his record, if memory serves. But he was from 1979 till whenever Malcolm O'Kelly hit 76 caps, is a long bloody time to have a record. And that guy played at least 15 seasons.
Tell that to George Stevenson.
Yeah, or what's his name, Ronnie Kavanagh in the 50s, a guy who played for an awful lot of seasons, but he was the record cap holder as well, with something like 35 or something really low.
George Stevenson was the record try scorer with 19 tries for, a very long time.
So Brendan Mullen, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking 50 or 60 years, I think, wasn't it, Jay?
Yeah, it
He
would have
played
been.
pre-war.
But there would be so many fellas that would, be in for 3 games. They'd have a disastrous season and then they'd never be heard from again.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, just mentioning Murdo's club take on have to travel to
Craigie Island.
Galway. They're playing.
Be careful of them students.
That's it.
Ravening hordes of disease-ridden students roaming the streets of Galway. Apparently, I was listening to the radio today, and that's the impression I got.
Must be true. It's on the radio.
Yep.
Yeah. Glasgow have Nakawara back for them.
Yeah. Good timing.
Exciting player.
Murdo says, I fear our season is doomed. No new players this year again, other than Richie Gray to see out his last few years. And the academy does not seem to be very productive. And with the SRU seemingly forcing us to retire or get rid of several to cut costs, I'm depressed already. Can we get Finn back, please, Mr. Dobson? His dad will say sorry and Finn has gone teetotal. We'll be discussing Finn Russell's performance in the semi-finals when we come to that. But yeah,
Apparently
Glasgow
has made it up with Gregor.
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah. But it just the wheels seem to fall off Glasgow. They were, for the last 5 years, they were the stronger of the 2 Scottish teams. And then, when Rainey left and went back to, took the Australia job, you often see it in football, don't you? There's a lame duck manager, and they sort of seem to have that sense about them last season. They had a poor enough record. I think they only won 8 of their 15 games, so.
Which for a side like Glasgow.
Yeah.
Because they were perennial title chasers in the Pro 14, and people expected them to either do that or push on in Europe, and they never really did. They just kept losing key guys. They lost Nakawara, then they lost Russell, and they lost Maitland. They lost one guy after another, key guys. Maybe not a huge flood out the door, but they were enough to kind of put a hitch in their step, as it were.
They've almost become a selling club now, haven't they?
Yeah.
They produce these some brilliant players, and then they're kind of
poached,
snaffled up by some bigger clubs in France or in England, and they're continually trying to replenish their squad, only for the next generation to be sucked up into some bigger.
It'd be interesting because they seem quite pleased with young Mr. Hastings. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes for them after with another year's experience under his belt.
So then, final game is the Ospreys travelling up to Edinburgh. Obviously, Edinburgh were in the final. Edinburgh got to the semi-final. They won their conference, and Ospreys finished bottom of their conference. So, 2 strikingly different form clubs.
Yeah, Ian Madigan put Edinburgh out though, which won't have resonated well with with Richard Cockrell, and they also got a good spanking in the Challenge Cup quarter final the following week. So yeah, they've some stuff to make up for, and then the Ospreys, who were bought by, was it South Koreans or somebody out that direction anyway, bought the Ospreys. So they should have enough bankroll to start coming back. So it might be interesting.
Knowing the Ospreys, they probably thought it was South Koreans, but it's actually North Koreans.
Harsh.
But fair.
Yeah. See, actually, you mentioned Ian Madigan there. He wasn't registered, or the Ulster hadn't transferred his credentials from the RFU to the IRFU, and I think there was kind of a bit of a, I don't know, they wanted to make too big a deal out of it because they only fined them 1 point, and I think they gave them a suspended fine of 10k. If they
lost the match point they got against Munster. Was it against Munster or against us? Against Munster, wasn't it?
Like, it was kind of as though we don't want to make this too draconian and then screw up the whole league tables, and then there'd be stewards' inquiries into it.
Well, it just occurred to me when I heard that news, because we were talking last week about was Ian Madigan dropped or was he injured for the quarter final against Toulouse? But it's much more likely that he just hadn't got his paperwork sorted, and people had noticed. So he had
his paperwork sorted by then. It was only one game.
It was the first 2 games, wasn't it?
It was the game against it was the first 2 games, the game against us and the game against Munster. They got 1 match point from those, and those were the 2 games he wasn't registered for. He's registered in time for the remaining games.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question still remains: was he injured or was he dropped? We don't know.
No, that's
Okay.
We will never know. So, lads, few interesting things happened in Pro 14. I suppose, well, just one thing that I noticed, that they released the fixtures, and one interesting event was that they brought in Monday Night Rugby. I know you say, I saw that you were saying it wasn't that innovative, but it is quite innovative for rugby, because it's quite unusual to play on Monday nights.
Yeah, I think they've just literally brought it in for because of the 2 reasons. 1, the November internationals, and 2, the fact that there's not going to be any crowds at any of them. So optimize it for TV and get people to watch at a different time. That's the reasoning I would see.
And I think you're a gullible fool for thinking that. I think the reason they brought
thin end of the wedge, Dave. Thin end of the wedge.
I think it is. It might. It depends on whether you think it's a thin end or a wedge. But I think it's definitely been brought in to expand the viewing slots for rugby in advance of the new TV deal for next season. Get another night where you can get rugby in. I don't think they care about people going to the games. People going to the games aren't watching them. You know, they're not watching the games. They're not watching the advertisers. So, because there'll always be people at the games. I mean, once you're allowed to have people in the game.
Not buying Land Rover.
John,
I seem to have some delay on my internet connection.
No, come back now.
But what I would suggest is that it's just a matter. It's just a broadcasting expansion, and they're using COVID or whatever as an excuse to get over the hump of it. And then, sure, well, everybody, was such a success when we tried it during COVID. Why don't we keep it?
Can we keep him? Can we keep him? Please, Dad.
I'm not. There's 2 ways of looking at it. One, I mean, Monday night sports is de rigueur in other professional sports. You've got Monday night football in soccer. You've got Monday night football in American football, colonial rugby. You've got Monday night baseball. You've got basketball on Monday night. So it's not all that unusual a thing. The problem is it can be an issue for the wider game, in as much as, you know, a lot of what we do is based around people have been out. A lot of what Leinster does is based around, you know, the proximity of the top level players to their communities. So little Tarquin and Jocasta won't be able to go to the match on a school night.
Yeah, and then even their dads or their mums mightn't be able to go out and have too many scoopy doops if they've got to get up for work the next morning.
Yeah,
and, like it or not, that is part of going to the games, is making it part of your evening and your evening's entertainment. Go to the game, meet up with your friends that you haven't seen for the week, and have a few drinks. Like that's quite normal, I would suggest. And like. And that's sort of one side of me. I'm a bit hesitant. Like, obviously with COVID, you can see, it's great to have rugby on 4 nights a week. I'm thrilled for that, but I'm not sure if I was scheduled to go to, let's say, just say for argument's sake, with Leinster Munster and they played it on a Monday night. Like that's a fairly big game that you'd enjoy going to and meeting up with some fellas that you hadn't seen for a while. And then it'd be Monday night and everyone just kind of shaking hands and going home and see you later because I've got to be up for work the next day.
Well, you do have some options, Jason. Like, you could do mad things like only have 4 pints, or crazier things.
Don't
like
drive with 5, Jason. Don't drive with 5.
take Tuesday off or something absolutely batshit mental like that. There are ways.
You could do that. Of course you could.
I mean, you look at. I mean, we saw the marketing survey that was put out in the wild by what looked like Pro 14 Rugby there last week, where there were a number of interesting questions about the future of television, and this is kind of just part of that.
Yeah, well, interesting times. And another, I suppose, the main talking point is, of course, we mentioned it a couple of weeks ago about South African teams, but they actually have voted to join. That's the Lions, the Bulls. Sorry, Lions, the Bulls.
Voted to explore joining, Jason.
Sorry?
They voted to explore joining.
Okay. Just cross that word out. That'll be erased in a couple of weeks when they see the financials. So Lions, the Bulls, the Sharks, and the Stormers, which, as you mentioned, Dave, leaves the Cheetahs out in the cold.
Yeah, there's been a couple of interesting responses to it. I sent you guys on a video. I don't know if you got to see it.
Yeah,
Mark Keohane used to be the South African, used to be Springboks media manager actually, and he's a well-respected journalist in South Africa. So he had his take on it. In as much as, yes, the Cheetahs are a huge team and they're everybody's second favorite team in South Africa, but they're not the richest team in South Africa. And they're a countryside team as opposed to a city team. John, I don't know what you're doing compared to the rest of South Africa. So there's that. The other side of it is they have a contract to play Pro 14 rugby until 2023.
Yeah.
So unless South Africa can get them into Super Rugby, which apparently South Africa have. And the other part of this statement is that South Africa are going to explore getting the Cheetahs into the revamped Super Rugby competition. So if the Cheetahs don't get into some competition, I can see this ending up in the courts. They made an announcement yesterday that they were engaging counsel, and that they engaged, some super duper lawyer in South Africa apparently. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. This one could run and run, folks. But having said that, having those provinces, having any 4 of the top 5 provinces in South African rugby will certainly increase the competitiveness of the competition. Leaving aside the whole thing about whether it's right for the competition or it's right for rugby or it's right for South Africa or it's right for the hemisphere, just having them in the competition will be good for the competition. Although one of the journalists announced it, and I replied on Twitter, and I replied to him and said, I wonder how long it'll take you boys to start denigrating this competition. And it took 23 minutes before somebody did. Before another journalist pointed out that South African rugby is riddled with drugs, and why are we inviting them into the Pro 14? So it took 23 minutes for the Irish rugby media to start denigrating the new competition. The teams haven't even joined yet.
Yeah. Well, get your retaliation in early.
I mean, one of the reasons people have many reasons why the Pro 14 isn't everything it should be. And we actually have a question in on it on Twitter from Sean Smith, who asks, whose turn is it in the Irish Times to say how shit the Pro 14 is? It turns out it was Gavin Cummiskey.
Did you read that article today?
Kumsky's
got
article.
everything wrong in it. Oh,
Huh?
my God. Like, I read the article and I said to myself, does he actually like rugby? Like, I get the impression that he doesn't like rugby. And then he had just a bitch and a whinge at everything, even about the RDS. You know, he said, oh, it's a shame that we can't be back there and won't be back there again until November. There's a match on Friday. He was talking about the A game last weekend. And he started having a whine about Joy Neville not being brought into the international for the Six Nations. I was like, please, you know what I mean? Like, just because she's a woman doesn't necessarily mean that she gets the gig. Like, you got to be the best or the top 2 Irish referees, presumably. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's a very good referee.
She's still a very. She is a superb referee, and in a year's time, maybe if she continues on her current growth path, then yes, certainly Six Nations. But she's still very inexperienced. This year, I believe she's doing TMO in the Six Nations this year, which is the next step along the line. You know, it's the first been part of the official team, an officiating team in a Six Nations match. So I mean, there's a career progression path in rugby refereeing, same as there is in everything else, and that's the next step on the line.
Gavin can't see it. Gavin just sees negativity and everything.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. It turned out it was Gavin Kumsky's turn. I didn't read that article. I was just saying what he was saying on Twitter. And that Leinster need to buy some South Africans like Munster. Having said that, do we need a grizzled enforcer in the pack to help develop some of our more raw players? It doesn't matter. We can't get one. We've no money.
But let's say all things being equal, should, like, again, Lancaster was on his press conference today and he kind of said it's going against the Leinster way. Like, the Leinster way is to develop players through bring in 1 or 2 sprinkling of foreign players, but you can't really, like, well, first of all, he said it was not going to happen. They're going to buy 5, foreign superstars to supplement your team. But, like, fundamentally, that's not what Leinster should be about. Like, the reason, I've said it 100 times, all the provinces, and sometimes, like, the provinces don't stick to their remit, but it is to develop players for the national team. And, by bringing it, like, as we've said again 100 times, when has Munster produced a centre? Because they've just continually for 10 years or probably more brought in 2 foreigners to play in the centre. And, like, their remit is to produce centres for the Irish team. Like, not to supplement a former South African centre that won a World Cup or captained his country.
Personally, what I like Leinster to do is have a team that is made up significantly of Leinster developed players. But I do like the idea that we've kind of gone down the road recently, or the last couple, of having a utility back and a utility forward from outside of the Leinster gene pool to bring young guys on. If you get the right character, somebody like, we've been actually very lucky with, we signed 2 duds in Sykes and Douglas, not as players, but in terms of, their legacy. But we had Nathan Hines, we had Brad Thorne, and we had Scott Fardy. And indeed, it has to be said, Hayden Triggs. Guys who came in, weren't necessarily going to start every game, weren't necessarily interested in starting every game, but left a legacy behind them in the players that they helped develop. And you want one of those maybe in the pack and one of those in the backs. And that's all we need from a foreign player's perspective.
Yeah. But, like, we got rid of Tomani this season. So, as you mentioned, with Carney gone, with Ferg gone, we are a little bit
skinny,
inexperienced, particularly when you think we're going to have 2 Six Nations games and 4 autumn or November international, whatever they're going to be called, winter internationals. Then fast forward a couple of months, hopefully, and we're into February, and we're going to have the Six Nations again. So we're going to have a significant chunk of international matches this season that we're not going to have. Obviously, we're going to have, say, somewhere between 10 and 15 players missing from our squad that'll be training with the national team. But we won't have many fellas like Ferg McFadden that has, 200 Leinster caps and 50 Ireland caps that will guide through, young fellas like Hugo Keenan or someone of his ilk.
And those guys are actually quite important. But, as things stand, I mean, none of us have any money. I mean, you and I had a bit of a discussion about this, Jay, on WhatsApp in terms of, how the plans, the investment plans for the CVC money have kind of been swallowed up by the need to survive this year and next year over, so, I mean, that's unfortunate.
Unfortunately.
Huh?
Well, it's fortunate and unfortunate. It's fortunate that
the money's in the first
the deal
place.
was done and that CVC's money is able to be used.
Yeah.
And obviously unfortunate
that it can't be used to develop the league.
Correct.
Yeah. But I mean, that's it. It's a good thing it's there to have that the teams have it to survive on.
It's a safety net for all of the clubs, a little bit, I suppose.
But in terms of, we also had a question in from Ricardo Tiernig, he says, I see the fingerprints of Razzie Rasmussen, who's obviously Razzie Rasmussen's Norwegian cousin, all over the planned inclusion of the top 14 leagues in the pro, whatever you're having yourself. He's definitely a key player in this. He has secured, in terms of South African coaches, he's managed to secure himself some fairly unprecedented power, because he was always a very good politician, as well as obviously his coaching success. He's got himself onto the board of SARU, which the national coach necessarily wasn't in the past. So he has been a driver in this. He's admitted himself that he's been a driver in this because he's experienced the Pro 14 and knows that how it can be beneficial to South African teams. So yeah, I'd say he's certainly one of the drivers of this process.
Yeah. Is there any downsides of those teams joining the Pro 14, lads?
No, they're 8,000 miles away.
Well, for a start, the pure and simple planet killing of the amount of plane flights that are going to be involved. You've got, just the whole travel thing for us as well as them. We've got to go down to play 4 weeks in a row or 2 weeks by 2, or having a league that's split. Italy was the furthest we were going, and that's a 2-hour flight. But South Africa, 12-hour flight, it's not nothing. I know they're in the same time zone, etc., but that's only good. That's only saving the a bit of jet lag and also saving the TV deals. But it's not stopping the travel. The travel is still brutal and exhausting and all of that stuff. So yeah, I'm not sure about it from that perspective.
It'll be interesting to see what way that they split it. Are they going to continue with 2 conferences? Would they even possibly have a third conference? I don't know. And keep the South Africans playing amongst themselves, and then sporadically play, in Ireland or in Scotland or whatever. I don't know what way they're going to work it.
What's been talked about is possibly a Scottish Italian conference, a Welsh conference, an Irish conference, and a South African conference, with more limited travel between the spots. But isn't that what killed Super Rugby? Going to 3 conferences and going, doing all that mad shit with local. They tried to put put Argentina into the South African conference and put Japan, the Japanese, the Sunwolves into the other conference. So it's kind of, and then of course the New Zealand conference was just so much better than everyone else, which will again inevitably happen in the Scottish Italian conference will perhaps be the weakest one, and there's all kinds of issues there around who plays who and how often you have to play the weaker teams and the stronger teams. And
I think we can be sure that whatever idea they come up with, it'll probably be stupid and need changing in 2 years' time anyway, because that's how the Pro 14 works.
Possibly. Yeah. Stop running down the league, Dave.
I'm running down the organisation. I mean, in fair, you make a fair point, but I mean, this is what now, year 17, 18 of the league, and it's what, the 11th format?
Well, I have to balance my distrust or my dislike of all that travel and all of that stuff against my distrust of the Nigels. because the other direction this is going is towards the Nigels and a British and Irish Cup. So, they're the only, and I think Jason made a really good point. Was it last week or a few weeks ago, where he said, what if this is just a training run for the South Africans to get into a more European/British whatever conference, and that we end up just being, what would they call it? Proving that it works.
A proving ground.
A proving ground, and then next thing, a feasibility study was the word I was looking for. And then the next thing is if it works out well, they all end up playing in England to all their South African expats with all the money, and we end up out in the cold. That's a possible scenario. Whereas if you get in the British and Irish league route, the South Africans are not likely to be coming back. That's kind of closes off that door. So,
The thing about the Nigels is, as long as you remember that their two prime principles are greed and avarice. Keep that at the front of your mind, and you know how to deal with them.
And it's a totally different model of how they run their rugby. I just think it would be a great idea. I think it would be a great idea if it's not going to happen, but if they changed that they use some of the matches, particularly over Six Nations, that you develop and you bring through younger players like we do, that you rotate and rest, that you use 53 players, therefore you've got 53, let's call it, you got 3 foreigners in the Leinster squad, so you got 50 young Irish men, all available, all getting game time, all potentially going to be Irish internationals in the future. Whereas I think, if you look at Saracens, look at the amount of, obviously they brought through a number of England internationals in their team, but there's also quite a few non-England internationals in that team. And Saracens are one of the better teams of bringing through England internationals. There's plenty of other teams. Look at Sale; they probably littered with foreigners playing for them that really contribute nothing to the greater good of English rugby, except a few thousand people that go to some part of Manchester to watch Sale every second weekend.
But Jason, they've 12 teams, so if we're producing 50 players each, they only need to produce 15.
Yeah, but they aren't. And the problem is, it's not the 12 teams; it's the fact that they've maybe as many as 4 teams too many.
Maybe they should have an English Super 8.
Well, you look at it this way. The population of England is what, 48 million?
Mm.
That's 8 times ours. And I think they've got they've too many teams.
Mm.
The reason why they have to do all this stuff with salary caps and stuff like that isn't for the IRFU exists, and it uses the provincial system and pro rugby and whatever to grow the game of rugby in Ireland, right? Everything they do is about growing the game of rugby in Ireland. We mightn't like it sometimes, but it's what it's about. Everything that the clubs, the Gallagher Premiership clubs do is for the survival of Gallagher Premiership clubs.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You're not getting any argument from us on that?
I wonder, lads, if there's going to be some clause that the South African teams want to join the European competition.
They definitely do. It was mentioned today.
Yeah. That has to be one of the carrots to get them in. Because I'm sure that, put it this way, and this point I kind of said tongue-in-cheek last week, but if let's say the Stormers are playing against Harlequins, and the soup is going to be too small for that game. That game will be moved to Twickenham and there'll be 50,000 at it. No bother. Because of the large...
That's just all the South African bar workers in London.
Fair enough, but there is a very large, substantial population of South African rugby-loving people that will rock up to a match in London.
Oh yeah, have a bit of a fly in the Western Car Park.
Particularly if the match is a meaningful match and not, kind of an exhibition or a friendly or whatever.
I agree.
Well, as my English cousin who lives in Wellington, New Zealand, once cracked a fella who was serving him in the pub, said, "Well, what's the difference between London and Wellington, Dave?" And he said, "Well, there's no difference. I go into a pub, a Kiwi pulls me a pint. It's exactly the same." So South Africans you could probably say the same about South Africans. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Europe is definitely their end goal because that's where the big exposure and they could get. That's where the sponsorship money and it's the same as for all of us. It'd be the same in South Africa. Obviously, the European competition, because it is a popular competition down there in terms of TV. So
yeah, that has to be their end goal, and I suppose maybe that's why they're having a review of where they want. Like
explore it.
All these things have to be hammered out, and like presumably the people who've signed up to the current European EPRC charter that's going to expire, presumably that's going to be jimmied to let them into it, and it's going to be the
big fear is if they're coming in, where do their places come from?
Yeah, well, who knows? Probably the expense of Italy.
Well, they come. Well,
they're going to come from the Pro 14.
14,
whatever the competition is going to be called.
So that's something there'll be an awful lot of self-interest in any negotiations. I mean, for South Africa, 4 very strong teams coming in there. A lot of organisations in Ireland, including in Ireland, would be very worried about that.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget. I think you made this point, Dave. I don't know where you made it, but that CVC have no stake in the Heineken Cup whatsoever.
Yes.
Yes, they do have a stake.
I've no stake in it yet, but
yeah, they do have a stake in two of the 3 leagues that make up the Heineken Cup, but they don't have a stake in it itself. So, is it in their interest to have South Africans in the Heineken Cup at all? Or is it in Premiership Rugby's interest to have South Africans in the Heineken Cup if they're going to be in the top 14 or Pro 14? And likewise with the top 14, is it in their interest? Because these are all the people who are voting in the Heineken Cup. So is it in any of their interests to have South African teams in? So who is this? Who are these people who are going to be making a place for South Africans in there, and how are they going to do it? So, there's a lot to
hold on, John. Don't overplay CVC's hand. They have 28% of the Pro 14 and 27% Gala Premiership. They don't have a controlling vote. They don't have majority ownership. So, they have a substantial stake in it, of course. But, do you know what I mean? They're not some sort of silent hand in the background guiding everything. They're a significant player, but they're not the majority.
That's just CVC. But what about the Pro 14 or the top 14 and the Premiership? There's nobody in there that is going to want to see South African teams in the Heineken Cup if they're playing in the Pro 14. I don't see it. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying, I don't know where these who's going to vote for these European places and who's interested.
I don't think France or England would or the Premiership would mind, because it might reduce their chances of winning it, but it would certainly greed and avarice. God, remember greed and avarice. They don't care about winning it; they just care about earning from it. So those teams would certainly help them earn from it. So I don't think I think that the conversation would have to be the hardest conversation is going to happen within Celtic Rugby itself.
But they need to do something to make a change. Do you know what I mean? It can't continue on in its current format. And particularly now we've lost two of our participants in it.
The one thing that's going to be beneficial if they come in and in terms of European places and stuff like that is it will strengthen the Challenge Cup.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Because you'd have stronger teams. You'd have teams that would, maybe even some South African teams, or teams that would generally count themselves automatically as European teams, would end up in the Challenge Cup. So you'd have 2 strong European competitions instead of 1.
Jim O'Connor formerly of this parish, will be having conniptions if he heard that, Dave.
Well, I always called. I had this conversation with John. I always called the Challenge Cup the Donkey Derby. I mean, in its old format, at best, you were the 9th best team in Europe. Yay! The format has changed since. You're not even that anymore. So, but you know, you have to, if you're going to restructure European rugby, you might as well restructure it in a way that benefits European rugby.
Yeah. Well, anyway, boys, it'll be interesting times. Just quickly looking back over the semi-finals of the European Cup, unfortunately, we weren't participants in. Racing stole the game, but they certainly won the game in the last moment of genius from Finn Russell. His little dink over the top, an amazing way to clinch the victory over Saracens in one game. And obviously Exeter then trundled their way over the line twice to beat Toulouse, who I thought shot themselves in both games.
Color settings on your TV. You could make the Exeter jerseys look blue, and if you squinted a bit, it looked like Leinster playing, because Exeter play the exact same way as Leinster do, if you think about it.
No, they've no flair. I totally disagree with you there. They've no
we don't
flair.
have a huge amount of flair either, Jay. Our game is based upon building phase after phase after phase after phase.
Look at the amount of tries that our teams. Look at the amount of try. We've been the top leading scorer in Europe for the last 4 seasons.
Who's Exeter's fullback?
Stuart Hogg.
Yeah, not a man without flair. And actually, Jack Nowell, and I thought your man O'Flaherty was superb for them on.
All of their back three are flair.
Their back three were absolutely superb, and they all made.
I don't know where you're getting this, Jason. I haven't a clue where you're getting this. They've no flair.
Oh, jeez. Well, lads, I honestly, I would rather not watch them play rugby because I find them.
I thought they played really, really nice rugby. I really enjoyed watching them.
Oh no! Look at the way Toulouse played so much better. They should have won that game. They blew a 4-on-1 in the right-hand corner. Your man cut back inside instead of letting the ball out.
They blew it.
Toulouse should have won that game by a country mile.
But Saracens could have beaten Racing by a country mile, but we're both happy with the results.
Well, I would have preferred Toulouse to win. I would have preferred an all-French final now.
I thought it was funny, though. A lot of people were saying, okay, Saracens are out, but they're still big money bags clubs. Toulouse and their money bags. Isn't it great to see them go out because they've got money bags?
It's professional sport, lads.
But it's great that Racing beat thing. Do you know Toulouse spend an Irish province more than Racing every year?
Yeah. But like they've always done that, Dave.
Oh no!
I'm just saying like they have a Michelin-starred restaurant in their stadium. You know, like they're a different level.
Disconnect in people's minds sometimes about, you know, they seem to think that Toulouse, Clermont, you know, one or two others turn up and play the game for nothing. Racing don't even make the top 5 French spenders. You know, that's the game in France.
Officially.
Well, if they're not in it officially, then the others aren't in it officially either. So 6 to 1, half dozen the other. But you know, I thought that's the brilliant thing though about Finn Russell. Actually, just you never know. The great thing about watching him is you never know going into a game. Is he going to enact something of sheer genius and beauty that you'll be talking about for weeks afterwards, or is he going to enact something where he's trying sheer genius and beauty, but ends up falling over and, you know, farting on the ball and costing his team the game that you'll be talking about for weeks after?
Well, isn't that what you love about watching?
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean, you love watching him, but you never know what he's going to do next.
You don't want him in your team. You certainly don't want the second version of him in your team.
You don't actually want him playing against your team either in case he does the first thing.
They scored a very similar try against, I think it was Clermont 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
But it was they were facing the other direction. But it was so similar. Only the centre caught the ball and then sprinted 50 meters and scored.
Donnacha Ryan, it has to be said, was excellent for Racing.
He was. Lads, I'm just conscious we're a little bit under time pressure, so I just want to briefly mention Leinster A played Ulster A last weekend. We lost. But there was a couple of notable things. We mentioned that Dan Levy was in the running to get a first start, and he didn't for whatever reason. He's not again in the squad this week. The other one was I was delighted to see Hawkshaw make another guy who was out for a significant amount of time.
Dublin 15 boy.
Yeah, he came on and played at out half for some of that game. So it was good to see those two. It was good to see him back, and hopefully Dan Levy can get back on the pitch in the short term.
Yeah, no, I mean these games, you know, there's a couple of reasons why coaches don't want them watched. One, they don't want, you know, scouting material, and two, they don't want, you know, what are generally kind of fairly shambolically organized kind of things, because a lot of it is just about running meters into guys.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we've been to games, Jay, where they've been played in 3/3 and stuff like that.
Yeah, like athletics, they call them junk miles. You have to do them, but you get the only benefit you get is getting miles in your legs, and it's the same for these games. Like, you know, I was just listening to again in the press conference from Lancaster. Like he mentioned, he was asked about Ireland and Leinster against England and Saracens, and he didn't even mention that warm-up game in Twickenham last year, Ireland-England. You know, that was, like he said, England have beaten Ireland twice in the last 2 games. So that pre-World Cup friendly was just what it was. It was a friendly. So, you know, he basically didn't care about that result. And, you know, so whereas the journalists now, well, we've lost 3 times against England. But the reality is it's only twice, because they're warm-up matches. They don't contribute anything except getting miles into your legs.
Yep.
Anyway, boys, as ever, thanks a million. Thanks very much for watching. If you are following us on Facebook or Twitter, please like and subscribe, and give us a thumbs up. Cheers. Thanks a million.